It has been such a crazy couple months working in the journalism industry. There have been massive cuts to funding. Media networks are either like merging or disappearing. Social media platforms are taking over. There's a lot going on.
Plus, now Trump is president and he's known for his disdain of mainstream media. He's even sued multiple networks, and his officials are threatening to cut funding from public TV and radio.
And we really are feeling this kind of like confusion in the media about how to cover this new era of Trump. Reporting on him too much can give people Trump fatigue. Overtly fact checking can make things feel biased, but then not fact checking enough can let like misinformation spread rampant. What is the right way to cover this?
Well, the New York Times wrote about what CNN decided to do. They said some organizations have agonized over whether to carry Mr. Trump and his penchant for falsehoods live on air. CNN will continue to carry Mr. Trump's remarks live with fact checking, saying that Americans had a right to hear from the President of the United States and form their own view.
Well, it's funny you quoted that because we're going to speak to the author of that article, New York Times media reporter Ben Mullen.
We're hoping today to kind of unpack how media outlets are bending the knee or buckling to Trump and his new administration. So first, maybe because of our roots, we're very interested in his lawsuit against 60 Minutes. And I know you've been following that. Can you give us like the latest update on it?
Totally. So basically what happened was a few months ago, President Trump sued CBS in Texas. There's a suspicion that he sued them in Texas because that district, there's a judge that's especially sympathetic to his claims. So it's not a First Amendment case. It's not a defamation case. He's suing them, alleging that they sort of misrepresented the public and that their customers who were in Texas were subjected to fraud because, according to Trump, and this claim is obviously disputed by CBS and many legal experts, 60 Minutes and CBS edited the interview with Kamala Harris that they did such that the interview sort of misrepresented one of her answers.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
For 2 weeks, 60 Minutes declined to respond to Trump's allegation before issuing a statement Sunday night, calling Trump's accusation, quote, false, explaining that it used a different portion of the same response that was more succinct to allow time for other subjects in the wide-ranging interview.
In December, CBS filed a motion to dismiss. But parallel to that, what's going on is the two sides are in settlement talks. As you, I'm sure, know, enormously controversial at CBS, which is kind of one of the last great bastions of investigative journalism on TV. A lot of the people on staff are upset by the prospect that the company might settle with the president.
Why do you think Paramount might settle? Because 60 Minutes, we see the journalists kind of saying that they don't admit to wrongdoing.
So there's a merger pending before the FCC. Brendan Carr, who's the chairman of the FCC. So last year, Paramount struck a multi-billion-dollar deal to merge with Skydance. And that merger has to be approved by Brendan Carr. And so there's a feeling that if they can settle this lawsuit against President Trump, Brendan Carr is more likely to approve the merger with the with Skydance. And Bill Owens, the EP of 60 Minutes, said yesterday in a meeting with 60 Minutes staff that he would not apologize to the president.
We know that the Trump administration is known for being more lax about mergers, but we read in your reporting that when it comes to media mergers, the administration is going to be evaluating networks' biases. So how do you think that kind of conditionality will affect not only like the culture at networks, but also their reporting?
It's a great question. In 2017, there was a merger between Time Warner, which owns CNN, and AT&T. And it was one of the biggest media mergers in history. It ended up getting blocked. But there is some speculation on the part of media executives I talked to that Trump will kind of play deal maker in chief, and he might exercise the authority of the Justice Department to punish people that he thinks are enemies of the White House.
And what do you think the effects would be if Trump blocks these mergers? Like, how would that impact the media landscape?
Well, it's a great question. In the case of AT&T Time Warner, one of the things that I heard from executives about why Max is so far behind, for example, Disney, and further behind Netflix, is because the deal was held up for, I think, more than a year. The two companies didn't have the kind of head start in the streaming wars that they could have had otherwise. So I think part of the problem here is that if these mergers get held up, then their rivals are going to consolidate market share and they're going to be able to sort of get a head start ahead of their competitors.
So we know ratings always spike around election season. It's like the highest ratings ever are. What has happened to them post-election?
So I actually just got an email from somebody like 5 minutes ago with the latest ratings through February 2nd. Fox is up 22% since the election.
Wow.
CNN is down 28%, and MSNBC is down 44%.
Whoa.
It's
That's
pretty
crazy.
remarkable. MSNBC, their ratings are still higher, relatively higher compared to CNN.
So how do you make sense of that? Like, what is happening to the left-leaning mainstream media? Where are their viewers going?
The MSNBC story is complicated slightly because since the inauguration, I believe their ratings have actually gone up. And this is kind of a cyclical thing that always happens after the election. Ratings go down temporarily, and then there's a pretty big spike after the fact.
So let's talk about the Washington Post. So we saw that more than 400 Washington Post reporters sent a letter to billionaire Jeff Bezos, who obviously owns the Post, to ask for a meeting to talk about the future of the paper. I feel like every time we've seen something about the Post, there's some like chaos, crazy thing going on over there. Why is what's happening there maybe like indicative of what we might see in the industry?
So it's a great question. There's been a series of self-inflicted wounds that have alienated both the journalists at the Washington Post and many of their subscribers. Among them, the decision made by Jeff Bezos to sort of end the newspaper's tradition of endorsements, the resignation of the Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist and Telnus, and a decision made by the editor-in-chief, Matt Murray, not to cover the Washington Post. All of these things have been enormously controversial among people there, and a lot of their best reporters have started to leave. Fast forward to now, you have all of these journalists basically sending a letter to Jeff Bezos saying, like, can you please come in and listen to us because we have complaints? Jeff Bezos was in DC for inauguration weekend. He had dinner at Asteria Mazza, which is kind of like a fancy restaurant in DC, but we have no evidence that he went and visited the newsroom.
And we read like some reporting that you did on the deck that was like presented at the Post and how like so much is changing. Like Bezos wants to target more like blue collar workers and encourage like more op-eds. Like even the slogan is internally changing. Like I thought that was really
For
interesting.
the last several months, they've been developing a new mission statement. They have this public-facing one that they adopted in the wake of 2016 called Democracy Dies in Darkness, which seems like a very sort of adversarial journalism-minded slogan, the kind of thing that calls to mind Watergate and their investigations. But they also have an internal mission statement, which is riveting storytelling for all of America. And the idea, I think, is to sort of have a broader encompassing Washington Post that's inviting not just to people on sort of the coasts, but also to people in middle America. And people who have been in meetings with Jeff Bezos have told me that he wants the Post to be read by firefighters in Cincinnati, people from all walks of life. And so I think there is an effort to kind of make the Post more accessible to more people. And another big part of that is they're doing this thing called Project Gemini, which is sort of like a newsroom-wide assessment of their journalism and how many people it's reaching. But I think they're still losing, I believe, somewhere on the order of like $100 million a year. And Bezos purchased the Post, I think, for somewhere around $350 million.
So something else that we're seeing kind of take place at Washington Post, like CNN, a bunch of different places is like networks and outlets are starting to really prioritize digital content and reporting. Can you tell us about recent digital overhauls at these different places?
Totally. Yeah. So CNN just announced that they were laying off 200 people and they were going to hire 100 people in the first half of 2024. What year is it? Yeah, 2025, I should say. And the idea is basically that they're going to phase out people on the TV side and sort of and hire people that can work in product. So all of these cable networks and some of these broadcast networks are fighting this rearguard action where they're trying to keep the TV business, which is enormously profitable. I think CNN still makes somewhere around like $750 million annually, primarily from cable distribution fees. They're trying to keep that business intact as much as possible, while they sort of build the airplane as they're flying it. So while they build this digital subscription business.
I mean, we're talking about all of these other places, but you are obviously at the New York Times. So can you tell us about any like big or small changes that you might have felt in the past year at the Times? Even in like your own reporting, you're obviously a media reporter. Is that more tied to politics now than you ever would have thought?
Yeah. There's this great media reporter named Ben Smith, who you guys probably know of, who now founded Semaphore. And he said something that I think is really true, which is that the best media stories are stories that touch on some other big area that's important to people. So media and politics, media and tech, media and finance, those tend to be the best ones. I think he's right. But as far as the New York Times goes, I think it's a relative oasis of calm. And I'm not just saying that because I work there.